Corinna, thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. We, in some ways, anticipated this conversation we're about to have yesterday in different ways. I think probably if you think back to the speakers we had yesterday, there was hardly a speaker from whatever location around the alliance who did not refer in some way to the South. The instability in NATO's neighborhood, broadly speaking, whether it was in Africa or the Gulf or further afield or the Mediterranean. And if you had a look at the NATO declaration, it's quite long, but I did scan it, you will see an enormous amount, actually, about the South in different ways. It's in different places. In part, it's talking about projecting stability. In other places, it's about capacity building. In other places, it's about the South. In other places, it's about Turkey and its own unique defense problems. So this is our session to talk about this specifically. And we have a wonderful group to join us for this conversation. And to start us off, let me welcome them. Please join me in welcoming them. Well, you all have the bios, but let me just mention we're delighted to have with us General Benjamin Hodges, who is at the Center for European Policy Analysis now, former commander of U.S. Army in Europe. Ben, thank you for joining us. Imen Ben Mohamed, a member of the Tunisian Parliament. Thank you.
Thank you.
Very much. Amanda Sloat, formerly in the U.S. government, now at the Brookings Institution. Amanda, thank you. And not least, finally, Soli Ӧzel from Kadir University in Istanbul.
And Institut Montaigne.
And Institut Montaigne, maintenant. Thank you. As is our practice, I was going to give them all an opportunity just to give us a kind of a little bit of an insight from their different perspectives, and they are very different perspectives, on the kinds of challenges that are being faced in the region, what we might see in the future, what the NATO role might be. And Imen, maybe I could start with you and ask you, just from your perspective in Tunisia, how you see the security environment and how you see, what would you like from NATO?
Oh, thank you. Yes, I'm maybe the voice of the South here and the voice of the new generation and the new democracy, actually. So when we talk about Tunisia, we talk about a new democracy. So, and maybe talking about the instability in the neighboring country of the NATO, Tunisia is the only stable country after the Arab Spring. And this is a good achievement for us. And we are trying to keep this democratic process going and this stability going, even in this region of insecurity and instability. And as you all know, that the crisis in Libya actually is a threat for our national security in Tunisia. And this is not an easy thing, actually, to keep this stability. Talking about the NATO and the role of the NATO, actually Tunisia is a no-NATO major ally, and we have a good cooperation in the security issue and the military issue. So we have the reinforcement program of our military, and we have the border control for stopping the infiltration of terrorists or the weapon, and we have this program of fighting terrorism, actually. And we have this strong relation of cooperation with the NATO. But about the perception, yesterday the Canadian Minister of Foreign Affairs said that maybe the NATO should not to be just the ally of the government and the country, but should to be also the ally of the people. And actually, when we talk about the NATO in this region, the South region, usually we don't have a very positive perception for the people, not the government. We have a strong relationship with the government there, and the NATO have a strong relationship. But when we talk about the people, the perception in general, when we talk about the NATO, is about the military intervention. And I think if we want to guarantee, and we have a recent memory of that, the intervention in Libya, in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in Syria, and all of this military intervention, And actually, if we want to guarantee the stability in this region, we should to change this perception. We should to have more relation with the people there. The Secretary General of the NATO yesterday said that the NATO should not have just a military role, but also a development role. So I think if we want to guarantee the stability, it's not the benefit for the Western country, but also the Eastern country and the South country, we should to have multilateral cooperation. And we should to focus not just in the security. We have a common enemy, the terrorist group, and it's very important to have this strong cooperation. But also we should to focus in development. We should to focus in promoting democracy in this country, promoting stability in this country, promoting actually human rights, and promoting a good governance there. And we should to have multilateral cooperation. So stability is not just security. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And you took us into a lot of different territory, which I know we'll come back to, the partnership piece, the perceptions piece, the capacity building piece. And it's clearly a two-way street, so thank you for that. Soli, maybe I could turn to you now. We already started talking a little bit, almost I'd say from the beginning of our conversation yesterday about Turkey. Turkey is distinctive in this politically, strategically, critical ally, big questions about Turkey and its direction. The minister yesterday was at pains to reassure us that Turkey is not turning away from its NATO alliance, despite its pursuit of some diversification, maybe I can say, in its policies. How do you see it?
Well, in 1990s, when NATO decided to identify 16 trouble spots, 13 of them were around Turkey. And we didn't even have the Russian challenge at the time, nor did we have really the kind of problems about terrorism as we identify it today, because 9/11 hasn't yet happened. So, and those have been added, and I guess Turkey still is in the eye of the storm, and it does have a lot of problems with its allies, as we've seen yesterday in the exchange between the German defense minister and our foreign minister. And there is indeed a serious level of anti-Americanism in the country today. But according to my school's survey, 70% of Turks really believe that being a member of NATO is a good idea. So that actually tells you something about where the public is. And when you look at what the government does rather than how it is perceived, the government is actually fairly engaged with a lot of things that NATO is doing and a lot of things that are in the summit declaration it's an endless list, that was published yesterday. Turkey really is in almost every new thing that NATO is going to be coming up with. Therefore, there is something kind of disturbing when a lot of people who either don't follow these things closely or pretend to, or they just have an axe to grind, ask whether or not Turkey is still an ally. They demand that Turkey be kicked out of NATO, or can we really trust them and all that. I find these a bit silly, quite frankly. But we have to look at what's happening on the ground, and to the extent that the South is going to be a major challenge in general for NATO and Europe. What the next steps in Syria are going to be, and how Turkey can and will respond, and whether or not the allies are going to see the challenge through Turkey's eyes, are going to be very important in determining the future of relations.
Mm-hmm. Soli, thank you very much. Amanda, maybe I could turn to you. The question of strategy South has never really been an easy one for the alliance. Even if you go back to the Cold War, there were never really equivalent theaters, East and South, for understandable reasons. It's a very diffuse space, an enormous space, maritime, land, air, cyber, with a mix of hard and soft challenges of all kinds, but very long-term ones, some of them. Does NATO need a more explicit strategy South?
Yes.
Thank you.
No, I was struck in listening to Soli, that as one who has worked on Turkey for many years, I have to say that that Turkey increasingly makes more sense to me now that I see what's happening in the United States. With his line about ignore the rhetoric and look at the policy. And I think that that's true if you look at what came out of the summit yesterday. I think, as both of you said, the communique really was developing a quite robust strategy, finally, for dealing with the challenges in the South after many years of having been looking at what's been happening in the East. And I really feel, as an American, it's unfortunate that the histrionics of my president in recent days has overshadowed the headlines of what really should be good news coming out of here. I think if you look at what U.S. policy has been toward the South, again, some of the actions have been a little bit different from what the rhetoric has suggested. I think the United States has been quite actively supporting the resolution of the name issue between Greece and Macedonia, which resulted in what we saw as the very positive announcement of the alliance starting accession negotiations with Macedonia yesterday. We also saw strong efforts by the United States in the last couple of years to support the reunification of Cyprus, which would be something that would resolve tensions between Cyprus and Turkey, which would then be advantageous to enable cooperation between NATO and the European Union, which has been a challenge. One thing that hasn't been as discussed, and I don't know if this fell into the list of 16 challenges that Turkey faced, but we've got increasing tension in the Aegean between two NATO allies, between Greece and Turkey, with Greece currently having 2 soldiers that are in prison inside Turkey. So we have plenty of challenges within the alliance, and particularly within NATO and EU members. But if you look at the broad range of challenges that we're facing in Southern Europe, it's clear that NATO and the EU need to be doing more. We have a significant migration problem, which is an example of where NATO and the EU have been cooperating effectively. We need to continue to do more there. We need to continue to try and resolve the conflict in Syria, which is contributing to the migration crisis. I also saw the NATO communique made reference to a number of ballistic missiles that were coming from Syria into Turkey, directly threatening a NATO ally. And then there's also broader questions about what's going to happen with Iran in the wake of the US administration stepping away from the JCPOA, looking at reimposing sanctions, as well as the broader question of how we confront Iranian aggression within the region, as well as everything we're trying to do to solidify democracy in North Africa. So that was a longer answer to your initial question of yes, we absolutely need to, and I hope that the U.S. continues to engage constructively with the alliance in finding ways forward to do that.
No, Amanda, thank you. And I mean, it just gives a sense of the sheer complexity of the region and the kinds of challenges that are there, not all of which clearly are going to be challenges where NATO is going to be in the lead. There are some of these things that are very long-term, migration challenges you mentioned, where there will be other institutions that will be taking the lead role. Ben, let me turn to you. From your experience and your perception now, how do you see this? But maybe in particular, say a word about how the alliance is going to balance these demands east and south, and maybe even say a word about some of these places we may not have talked about in the places at the seams between east and south, in the Balkans and in the Black Sea. What do you see?
Thanks, Ian. First, I had the privilege to live in Izmir, Turkey for 2 years, 2012 to 2014, for the NATO's new land command. Turkey, an essential ally for the alliance, the geography, obviously, a very capable military, incredible history. Also one of the most frustrating allies I've ever encountered. They're spring-loaded to be offended at every possible turn. So it's difficult to deal with them. But the alliance is still so much more effective with Turkey than without Turkey. And in fact, it's essential for us. The air base at Incirlik, of course, the control. Turkey is very, very strict in implementation of the Montreux Convention and who can come into the Black Sea with maritime sea power. That's very important that they do it so even-handedly and so strictly. Yet I think Turkey could provide more leadership in the Black Sea region. I think the Black Sea is probably more important to Russia than even the Baltic Sea. There's no way, I think, in my lifetime that Russia will ever give back Crimea, even though they've signed up to the Minsk Agreement, and of course it's U.S. policy that Crimea has to be returned to Ukraine. There's no way they'll do it. They've got even more A2AD capability there in Crimea than they have in Kaliningrad. They can completely dominate the Black Sea. So the alliance has to figure out, how do we push back, make Russia compete in the Black Sea in a way that's not provocative, but ensures the protection of our allies, Romania, Bulgaria, Turkey, and also very important partners like Georgia, Ukraine, and of course Moldova. Russia has troops still in Transnistria, peacekeeping troops. They occupied 20% of Georgia still, even after they signed the so-called Sarkozy Agreement where they said they would leave way back in 2008. They're still there and they have no intention of leaving Georgia. And obviously everybody knows what they're doing. Almost 40,000 Russian-led separatists in the Donbass, and of which probably 5,000 on any given day are actual Russian officers and leaders. Russia has made it impossible for the OSCE to do its task to monitor implementation of Minsk and ceasefires, so it's no wonder that Ukrainian soldiers are dying every week. So the alliance, as part of coherence, needs to figure out how do we put as much effort and attention into the Black Sea region as we have into the Baltic. You refer to it as seam, which I think is a reasonable way to say it, but I think actually it ought to be much more of a focus than a seam, because Russia uses the Black Sea as a launching pad into Syria, into the Eastern Mediterranean, and Romania, such a terrific ally there, doing everything it can to modernize. Of course, the U.S. has about 1,000 troops there on any given day, plus Aegis ashore, a lot of capability that's in there. We need perhaps a flotilla. My friend Jim Townsend used to talk about we need a Black Sea flotilla made up of NATO and partner nations. I think it's a great idea. But until Turkey's willing to lead it, nobody else will join it. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. You know, some of the points that you mentioned, but also some of the things that we spoke of earlier, you know, make this very important, underscore the point, the bigger point, that we have many more actors across this region now than we had in the past. Some of them old, some of them returning. I'd like to hear a little bit maybe from you about what Russia is actually up to, in not just in the Black Sea region, where we can sort of, we have some parameters to understand it, but in the Mediterranean itself, in the Levant, over the longer term. But also, you know, China is in the region in a major way. If we think ahead 10 years from now, it'll be very difficult to have this conversation without understanding what China's stakes are with their One Belt, One Road initiative and other things that will bring them more directly in. But also Iran, the proxies, the Gulf states, some of them NATO partners, who are also playing a much more direct role in security around the Mediterranean. I mean, how do you see this? I mean, this is being felt in North Africa, it's affecting American policy, it's on Turkey's borders. Please, let me know your thoughts about that.
Well, first of all, on Cyprus, good luck to NATO if they want to unify the island. Nobody else has managed to do it in, 44 years. Second, the 16 trouble points were NATO's trouble spots, not Turkey's. Turkey just happened to be in the middle of 13 of those. Look, I just read before I came here that Mossad is providing security for MBS. I mean, this is something that you would not even dream of only a few years ago, right? So we have a very new configuration, and everything is concentrated on Iran and Iran's challenge or Iran's threat, whatever that is. And I'm not quite sure that the current American policy of withdrawing from JCPOA really helps matters if stability and security is really what we're concerned about. And I guess Turkey is far closer to the European allies on that than it is to the United States, despite the fact that Turkey, along with the Arab states and Israel, is disturbed by the hegemonic aspirations of Iran in the region and the kind of influence it has both in Iraq and in Syria, because you really don't want your eastern neighbor to be at the same time your southern neighbor, nor do I think you really want your northern neighbor to be your southern neighbor either. So we have to really, and then you may wonder, I mean, I didn't mention it in my opening remarks, how come Turkey is so close to Russia today, right? I mean, we had this kind of...
Why is Turkey so close to Russia these days?
Partially because Turkey or the Turkish government believed that the Western partners were not sensitive to its threat perceptions. Second, and I think this is really being belittled, especially in this town, the absolutely inadequate reaction of Western allies to the coup attempt of 15th July 2016. You don't underestimate the kind of disappointment, disillusion, and then anger that generated not just in governmental circles, but certainly in the most pro-Western public in the country, in my view.
Okay. Let me maybe shift that slightly and talk about another place where Russia has also been active, at least diplomatically, and that's in Libya. And where we see that going. There are countries in the alliance, principally Italy, but also others, who see this, the prospect of a long-term, unstable Libya as a serious security problem. That can't be more meaningful for any country than Tunisia as a neighbor.
Actually, yes, the situation in Libya seems that we need maybe a few years. Let's be more hopeful to have a few years to guarantee the stability, actually the political reconciliation there. But is a little bit best than Syria. Actually, Syria is like a country with a very, very chaotic situation, and the reconciliation in Libya and Syria and all this country, actually, not just the agreement and the agreement between the major actors, international actors actually in the region, but what we need actually to find the agreement is not just the national or international, but the regional actors. The role of the regional actors about the stability and in Syria and in Libya and in Yemen also is very crucial for the stability of the Mediterranean. So yes, Russia is also now in Libya, but maybe we have a Tunisian initiative about the stability in Libya, but our initiative about Libya is to put the different political party there and the different political actors to have a dialogue with them. But the situation there actually need more regional agreement between Egypt, between Emirati Arab, between Qatar and Turkey, Algeria, and all this player in this region, and even also the European Union and United States, of course, and Russia. So it's not just international players, but the most important thing is the regional players there. So.
Okay.
Can I just add on that, and it may be that this is a case where the regional players need to take a much more active role, because I think Libya has really proven to be a challenge for the international community and also for NATO. We had a very successful and very limited military operation in terms of responding to Libya, but then I think really failed in terms of the reconstruction efforts. Part of that, I think, certainly had to do with the response of the Libyan authorities, not necessarily as much receptivity or absorptive capacity as we hoped, but it was quite striking following that there was not immediately a NATO-led initiative. We had a series of ad hoc national training initiatives to try and integrate the militias, to develop more capacities, and all of those ultimately ended up failing. And if you look at the communique, the Libya part is also the weakest part. We have very clear defense capability training starting in Tunisia, things that we're doing in Iraq, in Jordan. Libya is mentioned, but it's clear that the alliance is still struggling with how to deal with that. But that ends up being one of these weaker links still in developing terrorist threats and also migration threats.
Sure. But what are the implications, as you described them, and what would be the implications of a Libya that simply doesn't go back together, or a Syria that does not go back together, and presents you not just with a crisis management problem, but with a decades-long problem of holding at arm's length risks that affect the NATO alliance?
May I ask who's responsible for it?
Please.
Yeah, I just did. I mean, is it really the absorption capacity of the Libyans that is responsible for the mess that Libya is in? Don't the ones who have actually intervened and unseated, and certainly not a very likable fellow, and not having followed suit, are they not responsible? I just returned to Ms. Mohamed's earlier remarks. That is, if you want the Southerners to look at NATO and see what we've been discussing yesterday's inclusion, this, that, and the other, then there's got to be some accountability, and then you can move on. That's what I think, anyway.
Yeah. Well, I think that it's in the interest of the alliance to address threats and challenges at the source, not wait till they come to the gates. You know, for the Roman Empire had the Limes Germanicus for 250 years. They invested the equivalent of zillions of euro and hundreds of thousands of troops for 250 years to protect their people. And so I think conceptually, the alliance ought to be doing the same thing with a combination of development as well as security forces in North Africa to address why do you have Islamic extremism there? Why do you have hundreds of thousands of people willing to risk their life to come across the Mediterranean or come through Turkey to get into Europe? So, and by the way, I think probably a lot of Europeans would be willing to invest more money in security if they saw it in that regard as protecting Europe versus thinking purely in terms of Leopard or jets or something like that. I think that the Turkey, in 2012, I remember they said 40,000, that's the maximum number of refugees we can take. That's the red line, 40,000. Of course, there are more than 3 million. There are more than 3 million refugees currently in and around Turkey, plus probably 1 million that have already passed through Turkey. So I think all credit to Turkey for the load that it has carried. But, you know, I remember the former foreign minister said that the foreign policy was no problems with neighbors. And when Admiral Stavridis said, that's great if none of your neighbors have problems. But that's not the case with Turkey.
Okay.
Well, I mean, your question raises a broader question of what responsibility then we end up having in some of these Middle East countries generally. I mean, I certainly was not meaning to put sole responsibility on the Libyan authorities for the case of things. I mean, unlike Iraq, we didn't start the fighting in Libya. You know, when many people point to Iraq where there was a problem and the U.S. intervened and it was a mess, Libya where we sort of intervened and then walked away and it's a mess, and Syria where we did nothing and it's really a mess. And so analytically, you can start to have questions about where we're supposed to intervene, what we're supposed to do, and then what the responsibility of the local leadership is. I mean, my point on Libya simply was that there was an effort. I think the international effort could have been much better coordinated, but certainly it's also easier when you have international partners, which is why our engagement in Iraq has been more straightforward than in Syria.
May I take an exception to this? We've intervened in Iraq, it's a mess. We have kind of intervened in Libya, it's a mess. We have not intervened in Syria, it's a mess. Therefore, it cannot be us that is responsible for any of these. I really find that, which I know is very prevalent in Washington, but I really find that logic wanting.
I'm not saying I agree with it.
I'm
putting it out as an
I'm not saying
analytical
this
framework.
to you personally, but it is a very, very prevalent view in Washington. We do what we do. It turns out bad. We don't do anything, it turns out bad. We do things halfway, it turns out bad. Then it cannot be our problem because we try everything, but the end result is the same. Therefore, it's got to be the others who are responsible. Quite frankly, I find this a bit self-serving.
See, but everybody applauded when you made the comment about Libya essentially, you know, being related to our intervention. So clearly there's also sympathetic to...
Libya was related to an absence of follow-up. You intervene without a clear sight as to what it is you wanted to accomplish. You do your deed, you get the oil concessions, and then you have nothing there to build the so-called nation-building thing, which, by the way, it was not America's initiative, I grant you. It was the finalists on Sunday and the non-finalists on Sunday who were responsible.
We were leading from behind on that one.
Exactly.
And maybe I could just ask you on this, you know, sort of indirectly. I mean, you had a lot of experience looking at the Balkan experience and other things. I mean, you might draw different conclusions from that.
Yeah, for sure. I've heard from the current chief, well, let me say it this way, very senior leaders from Albania and Serbia, and both of them tell me, Ben, please do not let NATO leave Kosovo. The KFOR mission, while frustrating at times, it's pennies in terms of the cost compared to the value of the stability that it provides from both extreme sides of the argument. So, I mean, fortunately, the United States Army, the United States, has demonstrated it's going to continue to provide its contribution, almost 1,000 soldiers, to the KFOR mission. That's really a tiny little investment to provide an anchor, the only anchor of stability in that region, as the other pieces can hopefully fall into place. And I think Hungary deserves credit. They stepped forward when Portugal pulled out. Hungary stepped forward to fill the void that they've left behind. Now, Serbia is a place, and we're lucky, by the way, Jelena Milic is in here. She's probably one of the bravest people in the Balkan region, has worked hard to help highlight what Russian interference is looking like, the pressure that Russia places on Serbia. There actually are more U.S. and NATO exercises with Serbian troops than there are Russians. But if you look at the Serbian MOD website, you would think there were only Russian troops that ever came there, ever did anything. And of course, when you go to Serbia, you're going to have to get the 15-minute lecture about NATO bombing, even though it starts to sound a little bit perfunctory at this point. This is an area, if Serbia wants to become part of the European Union, they're going to have to do what's expected of an EU country in terms of transparency, cooperation, and allowing things to proceed toward a more peaceful solution in the Balkans.
And Afghanistan, what does Afghanistan tell us that's relevant to this? I mean, that's an expeditionary thing, obviously.
Well, I think certainly my own education, I made every mistake I could possibly have made in Iraq 2 years, and then I made all the same mistakes in Afghanistan, but which is probably why I'm a retired three-star general. But the fact is, we have, I think, come very close to achieving the real reason for going there, to make sure that Afghanistan could not be a source of terrorist strikes on the West. That's number one. Certainly, my own efforts, we focused on schools and so many issues, and eventually realized that really, at least in the southern part in Kandahar, it was all about stability and governance. Water, clean water, can they get their grapes to a market for something other than raisins, get pomegranate exports, and focus on that kind of thing and protecting the population so that governance could take root. So it took a while, but I think the review that was done when General McChrystal took over under President Obama's leadership, we began to get the policy right. But this is not a 10-year thing and then you walk away from it. I mean, we're talking about a 30, 40, 50-year investment. Again, part of that limus of protecting the West so that they can grow. But it will never, ever, ever succeed as long as Pakistan still allows Taliban or other organizations to operate in and out of there. So that's obviously going to be a part of it.
Hey, thank you. And I want to go to all of you, and I already see lots of hands. But maybe before I do that, Imen, I just wanted to come back to you on this, because to ask the question that, from your point of view in your region where you sit, is the concern that NATO is not going to pay attention, or is the concern that there will be too much NATO involved in some of these issues?
This is a very hard question. I will talk about the Tunisian opinion, and actually in Tunisia usually we are a very peaceful country, and the revolution was very peaceful, and every military intervention for us like something very don't looking very good actually, but Tunisia is different from Libya and from Syria, from Iraq and from the other country. And every country have his different situation and national situation. So in Tunisia, usually we are not really, we support more the political situation and the diplomatic situation. And when we talk about Libya, we talk about the diplomatic and the political dialogue there. And about the military intervention there and all the criticism about the military situation, we said the solution is not the military, intervention, because it's easier, faster, but the consequences are very difficult there and very, actually, is a very problem. if you want to have a good solution for the stability, we should to support the political dialogue, and we should to put not in an external intervention, but we should to put together the political actors, national political actors together, and this is what Tunisia do actually now with the neighbor country, with Libya. We don't interfere in the Libyan situation, but we just get them together to have a dialogue. And this is the initiative of our president and with Algeria and Egypt. And actually I think is a good point. Maybe need more time, but we can have a good solution.
Amen. Thank you very much. And I do want to come back in our discussion when we have time to talk a little bit about specific things that NATO should be doing in the partnerships realm in particular. But there are lots of people who are trying to get my hand. If we have a microphone, perhaps right here in the front first, if I could. Okay. There we are. And comments, fair game as well as questions. So as long as they're brief.
Thank you very much. I am Júlio Miranda Calha. I am of the Portuguese Parliament, and I'm responsible in NATO Parliamentary Assembly by a report about tackling challenges of the South. But I would like to question these four speakers, and mainly these parliamentarians from Tunisia. I was very sensible about your declarations on development and things like that. But if they agree with what happened with paragraph 55 on the declaration of the NATO Summit, because it's important that there was a declaration that we are committed to building a stronger and more dynamic relationship with our Mediterranean dialogue and Istanbul Cooperation Initiative. And at the same time, there was a declaration about the full capability of the regional hub that is situated in Naples. And there is also a regional center in Kuwait of NATO. So I think these answers to the worries of your countries, and this is a good way to pursue in dialogue and contact in the framework of this forum. That's the question I
Okay, thank you very much. So new steps on the partnership front in particular. So that's, no? Okay. Maybe just right there. Sinan, please.
Thank you, Ian. Sinan Ülgen with EDAM in Istanbul. I have a question for the panel, just to push you a little bit on your thinking about the Southern strategy. Could we ever contemplate a Berlin Plus in reverse? What I mean by this is that the current Berlin Plus arrangements are obviously arrangements that allow NATO to take, that allow the EU to take advantage of NATO assets and capabilities. But could we possibly think in reverse for the southern neighborhood? Could we ever envision an environment where NATO would be in the lead and basically structure an arrangement with the EU to take advantage of EU's competence in civilian crisis management, in state building, so that NATO is at the helm of the political governance of whatever effort is going to be carried out with regard to the southern neighborhood. And that would possibly also give solace to the US president in terms of the burden sharing arrangements between US and Europe.
Okay, thank you very much. And let me take one more and maybe come back to you and you can pick up on these, please.
Thank you very much. I am Federico Yáñez, retired general of the Air Force of Spain. And I am very much interested to know the opinion of one of the panelists, or both or three of them, about the situation, because we are speaking really about instability in NATO's neighborhood. What about the Sahel situation? How do you think this situation is going to evolve in the next future? Because I think that's a very, very serious issue to take on. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. And so let me come back to you and pick up on any of these that you'd like. The question about next steps in partnership, Mediterranean dialogue, or ICI, the NATO-EU equation in dealing with some of these challenges, and then finally the African piece, in particular the Sahel. Please, Ben.
And if I could, let me take the...
And do take the opportunity to walk around and talk to all.
Yes, sir.
No. I want you to be comfortable.
Yeah,
They don't look very comfortable, so I'm.
They're not.
No, those are horrible chairs. But
It's intentional.
maybe I should drop about 10 kilos and it would be okay. Let me combine the last two. First of all, I think what President Macron has offered with the European Intervention Initiative is a terrific idea to address security issues where maybe the U.S. doesn't have the same sense of urgency, but it would be the ultimate in Europeans taking on more responsibility. So I applaud the idea and the fact that the Bundeskanzlerin has sort of grudgingly maybe, but indicated that she sees the value in doing that also is very positive. And without French and German leadership, you know, it'll never get off the ground. So I think this is the right way. I think the European Union actually is better suited for this prevention/intervention into the Sahel, as well as other parts outside the periphery of the alliance, because the EU brings the developmental expertise, the resources, and frankly, the cultural mindset that's more appropriate to doing that. And of course, our allies along the Mediterranean are feeling the firsthand the challenges that emanate out of there. So I think French leadership here and German support is how we're going to solve that.
But don't you need,
Okay.
don't you need
Soli.
to have order first? I mean, let's take Syria, which for me is Turkey's main concern today. How are you going to have the competencies of the EU be instrumentalized or operational in Syria if you do not have order, at least a cessation of hostilities? And how are you going to get there if you do not have a deal with Russia? That, I think, is the question. And then, of course, then you have all sorts of other questions. Well, do we make a deal with Russia in return for the Ukraine? No, we cannot really do that and all that. Fine, I understand, but you've got to start somewhere. And for me, for instance, I literally have nightmares. You know, like, Dera is going to be done soon, so it looks. And there will be only one place left for the regime to turn its attention to, and that's Idlib, where there are 2.5 to 3 million civilians and plenty of jihadis that have been actually sent there on purpose and waiting to be hit by the Syrian regime. What if they do massively, and then Turkey has another wave of unstoppable refugees? Is that just Turkey's problem? Is it a NATO problem? It looks like the Syrian government has no interest in taking back any of the refugees that are actually in the 3 neighboring countries. Are these going to be the problems of just Jordan, Lebanon, Turkey, or EU problems or NATO problems? So how can EU do whatever it is good at doing without order having been accomplished?
Well, so and part of what you said, though, the premise was that Russia wants order in the region, and clearly they don't. I mean, they support a regime that uses chemical weapons on its own people. This has operationalized the migrant flow. So this is a weapon in the form of hundreds of thousands of people flowing into Europe, creating more tension, creating division, exactly what the president of the Russian Federation wants. So without Russian involvement...
By the way, this is exactly what most Turks believe the United States wants to do. But I don't share the view.
I don't know anybody that wants that, by the way. Thank you. Maybe I should get out more.
And if Turkey gets itself in trouble seriously with Syria and even with Russia again, then you have an Article 5 contingency. Maybe. Right? Manda, what do you think?
Many things. I agree with some of your critique. I mean, the EU had my, UBAM, which was the border assistance mission in Libya, and faces similar problems of how you secure the external borders when you have a lot of chaos happening on the inside. I would also disagree with the premise that the American president has a sufficiently sophisticated understanding of burden sharing, that allies doing anything short of meeting the magical 2%, which apparently now is being raised to 4%, of defense spending is going to satisfy that. But I do think it's going to be interesting to see in the coming years how the EU ends up responding and how the PESCO initiative ends up developing in response to some of the critiques that President Trump is putting forward. And personally, I don't share some of the concerns of many in Washington that after years of harassing the Europeans to do more, they're finally going to do more, and this somehow is of concern to us. I mean, certainly you've got a caricatured American perception, which is we want you to do more, but only in the ways in which we tell you that we want you to do more. more. On the Sahel, I think you're absolutely right. I was in Madrid earlier this week. And it really reinforced for me a concern of a part of southwestern Europe that I had paid less attention to, which is the Sahel. And I heard repeatedly in Spain people talking about Morocco, talking about Algeria, a lot of the migration coming from there, not as much in the refugee sense, but in a lot of the economic migrants, as well as some of the other political instability that we're seeing elsewhere in Africa. And so I think while a lot of our attention rightly has been focused on some of the immediate conflicts in Iraq, Libya, Syria, we also do need to be paying a lot more attention to some of the political and economic stability coming from other parts of Africa. And I think you've got the French who have been active in the Sahel, you've got the EU looking at doing some economic development there, but it's another place that I think we as an alliance need to be much more focused.
And Imen, this is your south, right?
Yes.
This is the south of south, in a sense.
Yes. I want to just to comment my colleague from Portugal, correct. That's what I said. We need more cooperation and we need more dialogue for the reconciliation and the state building and this, the peace building in this country. And this is a very important thing. And what we can do with the NATO, what we can do with the European Union, what we can do with the international community is building the trust with the people and have more cooperation with the government and the state and the civil society also, because it's very important role of the civil society in our country is one of the crucial, we can say, element of the stability in Tunisia. So it's not just a level of to fight in terrorism, to guarantee the stability, not just security, not just military. Multilateral economy and building civil society, building the state, building the promoting the economy recovery of this country. So it's very interesting and it's very important, and we need a real cooperation about that. So I agree with that. So the south of the south. And we sometimes we feel the north there. So the problem is the migration actually, and we. Tunisia is a state not just of, point of partenza, we said that, in, point of immigration, but is hosting country also. So all the problem in the south, we feel that in our country for all the problem of actually the immigration and the hosting and the humanitarian problem. So, and we try to do our best for that. So yes, we need more stability for all this civil and humanitarian situation.
Thank you. Let me take a few more. Let me start right here, please.
Hi, I'm Jelena Milic, the person that General Hodges made speechless, but only for 2 minutes. I recuperated. I don't have a question, but I do have a small intervention with regard of dismissal of humanitarian and military interventions from our Turkish colleague. Yesterday and today, we actually commemorate yet another anniversary of genocide in Srebrenica, and many of us in the region, and I think broader as well, think that this intervention came actually, the bombing of Sarajevo, around Sarajevo, Serbian troops came like 200,000 lives and 2 million refugees too late, you know, and many of us do understand, you know, that Serbian forces did kill 8,000 Kosovo Albanians, you know, so humanitarian military interventions are not there to improve things. Unfortunately, they are there just to prevent horrors. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And just right here, please, in the front row, if I could, if there's a microphone floating about. Thanks.
Good morning, all. Thank you very much for your great intervention. I am Claudia Peña Utron from Spain. I'm president of the Youth Atlantic Treaty Association in Spain. And I had a question for you, Oliver, especially for you. In Spain, this is the 5th year we do it. We organize an international event, and we bring young professionals from NATO and from the MENA section together to discuss about the geopolitical agenda of the South of the Alliance, because we saw that we really needed the input that the young professionals from the MENA region could bring into the a discussion table so we could think of new and creative ideas on how to solve the current problems. So my question is, how do you think we can better engage with the MENA youth, especially with this case, the young professionals from Tunisia, because we in the YATA network, in YATA International, we do not want to miss all their experience, because we have learned that thanks to them, we can have their perspective of the problems rather than how we see it from the south, and they say, as you said, you see it from the north. So how can we better engage with them? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And let me maybe just take one more, and if I could go just in the back, please. Yes, please.
Good morning, Alice Panier from the Johns Hopkins University in Washington, D.C., but I'm French, actually. Just about the Libya intervention, I think it's not only a matter of follow-up, but also the way it is so debated is because the grounds on which it was launched are debated, and we have doubts about the intentions, about why actually we went in there and why the French pushed for it. So without actually trying to find an answer now as to what are the actual reasons for Libya, maybe NATO needs to think about how it communicates about its interventions and about why it goes there in the first place, not only when it is there and afterwards, but just to just inform the public, I think, more thoroughly with clearer information.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks very much. So questions about intervention, about youth engagement, about the public diplomacy around intervention. Thoughts on these, please?
First of all, I didn't say universally that military intervention is bad. I mean, I lived through the Bosnian crisis, and it was an intervention far too late. And it's going to sound a bit cynical, but it came when the strategic delineations were almost completed after the genocide of Srebrenica. And for about 5 years, not just in Bosnia, but before that in Croatia as well, the world basically stood by. European powers had different interests, they blocked one another. But ultimately, what happened in Srebrenica finally got the United States, which wanted to let the Europeans take care of it, and they couldn't. And the United States finally intervened and did it, but it still was unable to build afterwards a Bosnia that is functional. Maybe it was impossible to make it functional. So I just want to make the, add the point. Okay.
Right.
I've got to push back on that. First of all, you're very unfair to the United Nations, which did try to intervene, not successfully, but a lot of really brave men and women from several different countries did try to stop what was going on before Srebrenica. It was unsuccessful. Fortunately, under President Clinton, the United States did, as part of the alliance, then provide leadership, and of course, the Dayton Peace Accords, but it was still a group of nations that were involved in it. It was our great alliance. I think this was the first time the alliance actually went out of sector to do a mission. Hugely successful, not perfect, but hugely successful. And again, it shows how important it is to have American leadership, but also how important it is to have the alliance, where you have the right rules of engagement, you've got the right sort of chain of command, the right kind of mission that allows us to do it. That's why our alliance is so important.
Mm-hmm.
I thank you for the point, which I think is important. And this gets at some of the larger point that I was trying to make with this comparison of Iraq, Syria, Libya, and you could certainly put Kosovo and Bosnia in that, which is there's a continued lack of clarity within the international community, including within the NATO alliance, about how and when we want to intervene. We went into Kosovo, some argued questionable legal basis. When we went into Libya, people were relying on the Kosovo precedent. The Russians supported Libya in the UN. They've come to argue that they have regretted that because they didn't understand what we were going to do. Certainly many people, and I have deep sympathy for this, would argue that the horrors of chemical weapons use in Syria would merit a stronger intervention from the international community. And so I think this whole debate goes to show that there's still a lot of questions about whether we intervene to further specific national interests, what our responsibility is to intervene to protect American interests. And a lot of the initial support for responsibility to protect that emerged in the Balkans has gone away. I mean, the reason for intervention in Libya was Gaddafi's comments that he was going to hunt down people like rats, and that's why we went in. I think some of the military action that we've seen by President Trump in response to CW has been justified, but certainly for those who are being killed by barrel bombs, it's not anymore more horrific of a death than those are being killed by CW.
Just
Please.
for the youth engagement, actually, Tunisia, yes, is the population of Tunisia are a very young population, and we have, as I said, a very young democracy also. And the promoter of the revolution was the youth and the women in Tunisia. So how to engage with young, I think. With civil society, the role of the civil society. The youth in Tunisia have maybe less participation in politics, and actually with 7 years after the revolution, they start to lose hope also to change actually in the situation in Tunisia. Even the situation actually from who look outside Tunisia. 7 years is nothing after the revolution, and we did the big steps actually in our democratization. We talk about the elected parliament, the constitution, the very modern and democratic constitution, and we talk about the gender equality and the human rights guarantee, but we still have economic transition, and we still have difficulties in that. So, and this is the key for the return of the hope in the democratization of Tunisia for the youth. So what we can do is to, yes, more dialogue and more, how can I say, exchange of expertise with the Tunisian youth, because we need that actually, and we need to give the youth, the Tunisian youth, more hope, because if we lose hope, there is, that's mean we will return maybe in a fragile situation. We are going very well in our democratic transition. We are still going in our economic transition, but without the role of the youth and the hope, the return of the hope of the youth, and with the cooperation with our partner actually in the region, the Mediterranean region, we cannot do it actually. So yes, more engaged for youth and with the civil society there.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm conscious of our time, but I think we have time for one more question, and I have one of my own before we end. So please, just on the aisle there.
Yeah. Hello. This is Wakar from NATO Association of Canada. I worked for US government before. I have a question for you. When we say we intervened in one country, and Afghanistan and Iraq, and then they have problems, and then we intervened in not in another country, and they have also problems. So do you want to say like your presence and absence does not matter in any country? Because I say that, and also like if you want to defeat Russia, you create fighters in Afghanistan. And after you are done with that, your narrative changes. Like we are fighting Russia from what they are doing in Afghanistan and Pakistan. So how that narrative shifts so soon? Because now your president says like you wasted money in Pakistan, right? Is this the right way to treat your allies, like who were engaged in the proxy war for you? Just wanting your comment on that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And just to show we're nothing but not flexible, I'm going to give up my question. I'm going to go right over here. So if there's a microphone, a last one, because I have a feeling we're going to have some comments on all of this.
That's very nice, very kind.
Please.
And also thank you for the fruitful conversation. I'm Roderich Kiesewetter from the German Parliament and heading the German delegation to the Parliamentary Assembly Union of the Mediterranean. And I want to provoke a little bit. I really question the role of NATO as a former NATO officer in this region. I ask, why don't we encourage the European Union to better employ itself in this region by being enabled by NATO and other means? Why do I ask that? I would like to ask Imen bin Mohamed whether they see a role in Tunisia for the European Union to be engaged more comprehensively. And I would like to ask Amanda about the perception of the European Union inside your think tanks. I need to see more impact of the United States encouraging the European Union for burden sharing in this region. This is not a role for NATO. It would create a mismatch, and I completely agree with Professor Ӧzel. we should not create a mismatch of organizations. We should be very clear that an engagement of the European Union encompasses not only military means, but we have to look if crisis prevention doesn't function, that in the post-conflict we always need military intervention being embedded into a comprehensive political approach. And this the European Union could perform if they are encouraged to do so. So I would like to encourage you to build much more on the European Union and to foster the relationship between the United States and European Union. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And thanks to the two last questions, because those are really perfect ways, I think, to round out our conversation. So please pick up on any of these things that you would like. Who would like to start?
I mean, I'm happy to respond to the two questions. The one advantage of no longer being a U.S. diplomat is I can say what I want and don't have to speak on behalf of the U.S. government. So these are our personal views. I mean, first, in response to yours, I mean, I think there are a lot of voices in Washington think tanks trying to make the case. But the one thing that I will say, and I don't, at the risk of sounding too Trumpian on this, is I think there is a somewhat unfair division of labor, and I hear this a lot in Germany, that the Europeans want to focus on cleaning up after the conflicts, the prevention of conflicts, and I think all of that is very important. But at the same time, I spend a lot of time engaging with people in Middle America, and it's very difficult to explain to a mother in Idaho why her son should fight in the hard conflicts and die, whereas the son from Munich is going to be involved in the arms proliferation and the stabilization efforts. So I think there certainly can be a division of labor. I think all of these things are important. But I think it's unfair to characterize it, and it's part of what is fueling the popularity of Trump's message on this, that the Americans should deal with the hard security and the Europeans should deal with the soft security. And I think as the earlier question said on the Balkans, I mean, the United States has had expectations in the past that Europe is going to deal with problems in its own neighborhood, and I think as we saw in the Balkans, that didn't happen, and as Soli said, that is why the United States ended up getting involved at a later stage. So in the United States, it would be great to have Europe do more, both on the hard and the soft security side. On the question about U.S. engagement in the conflict, I mean, this is a very live debate in Washington right now about what the role of the United States should be. And this didn't just start with Trump. I mean, this was a lot of what Obama's guiding philosophy was in Syria, and it was why the American approach in Syria was focused on countering ISIS rather than getting involved in the Syrian civil war. He was interested in withdrawing troops from Afghanistan until he was persuaded to do the surge. He was interested in withdrawing troops from Iraq. There's a lot of war fatigue in the United States from having invested a lot of blood and treasure in Afghanistan and again in Iraq. And so I think we also tend to go through phases in the United States of interventionism and retrenchment, and certainly coming out of a lot of the financial crisis and the war fatigue, there is more of this state of retrenchment. And again, it's part of the popularity of Trump's message of why should the United States be the world's policeman? Why should we be expending military lives and funding in doing this? But I also agree with you, and it was one of the things I was quite critical of our Syria policy when I was in government, is that if the U.S. absents itself from international leadership, somebody else is going to come in. And I think what we have seen in Syria is that Russia has taken over a huge role, and Iran is also playing a role. So there is an opportunity cost to the United States for not getting involved in trying to resolve these conflicts.
Super, Amanda. Thank you very much.
Very quickly.
Very briefly, there are a lot of things on the table, but there's also more of the NATO Engages conversation to go. So, and there's coffee too. So please.
Okay. Oh, thank you for my colleague Roderick from Germany. Actually, yes, the European Union, we have, as you know, a very strong cooperation with the European Union and with the single country, also Germany, France, Italy, and European Union are our first partner, economic partner, actually. So we have a multilateral about security. We have a very strong with Germany and the United States. Also, the border control of in the border of Libya, and this has helped us too much to guarantee stability and the security in Tunisia. And we have a common problem actually about fighting terrorism and about the immigration and all this topic. And we have a strong cooperation, but the most important field that we have a good cooperation with the European Union are the economic one, because in the Tunisian side, yes, we did our political transition, but we still have our all this economic reform and economic transition, actually. And we cannot talk about a real democracy without economic stability. So what we need, actually, and what we do with our European partner is have a strong economic cooperation. So thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Ben, last thought.
So Clausewitz said that the first duty of the general and the diplomat is to understand the nature of the war. So intervention in and of itself is not wrong, but what is the nature of the intervention? What is it we're trying to do? What's the desired outcome? And have we thought that all the way through? Certainly when I was a colonel, a brigade commander at the invasion of Iraq, I completely misunderstood what we were getting into, along with everybody around me. So the key is how fast can you get it right? How fast can you make the necessary adjustments? And I think we did. But we certainly started off wrong. Coherence, the theme, one of the themes that was unfortunately a little bit overshadowed here the last couple of days, pulling together all the incredible achievements of our great alliance from WIIS Summit, Warsaw Summit, and now pulling those together into a coherent plan that addresses security challenges, all the different security challenges that face our alliance, and keep the alliance together. And certainly for me, that means the Black Sea, coming up with a way to tie together our great partners like Georgia and Ukraine, as well as our allies. Definitely need Turkish leadership in this. Turkey's is big enough and strong enough and great enough to be able to face to the north as well as to the south. And then finally, everybody should keep in mind the United States Senate voted 97-2 on a resolution affirming the importance, the vital nature of our alliance and America's commitment to the alliance. 97-2, that almost never happens. And so the Congress represents the will of the American people, and so everybody should take a lot, some comfort and confidence in that.
Here, here, here. Soli, no last word?
If I must. Well, I guess what comes out of this is, first, for the South, we'll have to really be thinking beyond just defense measures and hard security measures, number one. And second, whether one likes it or not, a way has to be found in order to have a conversation with Russia that is going to be constructive. It may be difficult, but we'll see.
Soli, thank you. Soli, Amanda, Imen, Ben, thank you very much. Please join me in thanking them for this conversation. And
yeah, they won't.
We welcome you to coffee. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That was super.